there's so many things that influence us to think about ourselves a certain way.
Oh, yeah.
And if you believe some of those influences, you might become something maybe that is not as powerful as you could have become. You know, maybe you were meant to be an oak tree and you believe you're supposed to be a banana plant or something. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
I think I was supposed to be a banana plant. But I mean, I've thought about this a lot, actually, but not in the same way that our next guest has. And I think she hit it on the head. Her book is called Gender Physics. And before you recoil and think this is going to be a topic that you want to fight back against, give Betty Ann Heggie, is that how you say your name, Rob?
Yes.
A chance to speak. She makes a lot of sense in the book. And I think two things, first of all, yourself. You know, do you know that you are a combination, I know you know this, of nature and nurture, right? It's kind of both, right? The older I get, the more I realize that my nature was really what I should have been paying attention to, you know? Mm-hmm. Not that my nurture wasn't good, but yeah, I'm just saying. But then there's the other half of this is when you're a parent and you're trying to raise your child. I remember with my son, Alex, when I was raising him, I didn't want to influence... nothing to do with gender. I don't even think that was part of my, awareness. It was more or less, hey, if he wants to be in sports, let him be in sports. If he wants to be in music, let him be in music. You know, that kind of thing. Betty Ann Heggie, I may be mispronouncing your name. It's an honor to have you on our show. Good morning.
Good morning, and I love your description. You hit the nail on the head of everything that I wanted to say, so thank you for that.
Oh, but I don't say it as well as you do. I think the skill you have at telling us this stuff is important, because then we can steal your words and use them.
Well, I came to all these conclusions because I was a single woman working in management in a mining and agricultural company where I could see that there were certain ways that guys acted when they were in my office, where they talked about with a lot of heart about their care for their children, just like you just did. They want to be good parents. And yet I could see also the way they would get into a boardroom with a lot of other guys and suddenly become a lot more, as we say, macho. And, we're going to be tough. And all of a sudden it brought out a lot of different characteristics. And I also realized that they had certain expectations for me and the way that I should act because I was a woman. And it made me realize that none of us are being who we really are. We're all playing this act of our gender, and it really stifles who we are. And a good part of being successful in business is that you understand your strengths and you play to your strengths and you bring them forward.
Yeah, everything.
And if you want to be a good manager, you want to hire people for the right skills with the right job, and you want to develop them. But if people are hiding their skills and talents, it's hard to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And if I had a daughter, I would say the same thing to her. I would say, you can do whatever you want to do. Don't let anybody tell you can't do something because you're a girl. Now, I don't know, you might disagree with this, but I think there are some things like football player. Now, I know they can be a girls' football league, and there can be girls who can compete with guys in the NFL, but that's one of the exceptions, I think. You might disagree with that. I have a different question, though, aside from what I just said. Do your conclusions apply to every country in this world, or is America unique in some way in this regard?
Well, that's a really good question, because there's a lot of research out there that shows that even more important than our gender training than we get in North America are cultural differences, which are going to influence people from other cultures when they come into ours. So it really, what I did in the book is I took this from a North American point of view of these are the attributes that we would typically consider to be feminine, and these are the attributes that we would typically consider to be masculine. And I said these attributes are up for grabs regardless who you are, and you should use them, but you should make sure you use them in the appropriate amount and not allow them to become out of balance and dial up to the extreme, because that's when a strength becomes a weakness. My mother used to always say when I was growing up that too much of a good thing is a bad thing, and that's basically what I'm saying. But what I find is interesting is that when you get people from other cultures and they come to North America, quite often their ideas, well, we even see it in North America. We know that we think about people from the South as being far less direct than people from the North. We often talk about that for people from New York versus people from Alabama, that some of them will say things more indirectly, and that's considered polite in their culture. So that's almost like a separate culture within the country. And we see that even amplified when we have somebody that comes over from, say, Japan, because their ideas of what's polite would be to be a lot more reserved than someone in North America. So, you know, what's interesting about this is that the theories that I outline in the book about the differences about getting out of our gender to be ourselves actually are very, and the techniques that I recommend are actually very applicable if you're working in an international business with people in another country, because it will help you figure out how to communicate with them when they have a different basis of what they think is polite or acceptable.
And you show in your book, you have people actually doing different exercises to prove your point.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. What I have found interesting about this book is how many men. I thought when I published this book, and I was recommending that men assume and use many of the characteristics that we would traditionally consider to be feminine, that I would get a lot of pushback. I thought, oh, they're going to say, oh no, I'm not doing that. No, you know, who are you trying to feminize me, etc. But actually, what I've found is that I've had letters or, you know, emails and messages from men that have said, I, you know, was working down in South America, and I had a lot of problems with a customer, and I used the techniques that you recommended, and I made great progress. And I was like, wow, you know, I think people are ready to hear this.
Do you know what I'm curious? I'm curious about, because you said something earlier that this is basically coming from, that in the boardroom, in the business setting, the men were a little different than they were when they were in a more relaxed state. And I think that's me. What you described is how, not who I am, but how I am sometimes. So, but I can't imagine changing that. I think sometimes, because, you know, it's kind of like everybody's going to be there at that party, and I got to be there with them. Otherwise, I'm going to lose whatever it is I'm there to defend.
Yeah, I get that for sure. You know, I think that we're all of us like musical instruments, and we tune ourselves to the sound of the group. So, for example, I was a single woman working with a lot of men, and as a result, I picked up a lot of masculine characteristics because that was the mood or the culture of the group, and it's quite natural that we assimilate. So if you are a woman working with a lot of men, you will probably pick up more masculine attributes. I think the same thing happens with, say, a male teacher in an elementary school where he might be working with a lot of females. He will, first of all, the environment of the school system is far more nurturing, which is a characteristic that we think of as being feminine. So a man is going to then probably want to be oriented towards doing that in the first place if he's more like that. But then when he spends more time with other people that are talking about how important that is and sharing how they help support and nurture a young child, he's going to adopt those things as well. So we all assimilate to our group. So
no,
Larry,
you're right.
What you're describing is quite natural. Where it becomes a problem is if we have a group that is all one, using all the gender attributes of one gender and not the other, and then it dials up to the extreme. So then you get people that, you know, it's important to be an individual and take care of yourself, but of course, if you do too much of it, you only think that you're important, and you can become narcissistic. Or if so what... You said earlier, you know, I can't see what would make me change. What makes us change is if we are in a crisis. You know, if we can see that things just aren't working in our lives, or we're really unhappy and we feel like we're looking around and we're not feeling fulfilled, those are the things that cause us to look at what can I change. Yeah. And that's usually what causes us to look at, okay, maybe if I adapted my behaviors and characteristics and the way that I interacted, maybe I could change things. And that's when people are open.
Okay, this is not an argument. I'm agreeing with what you're saying, but I have an example that I want to share with you. Well, for a while there at this radio station, I was the only man. There was a period of time when there were no other men here, and I was doing an on-air shift, so I was the only one in the studio. And there were maybe 3 or 4 women out in the office area, and one of the women came out and said, "Larry, could you come out here for a minute?" So, and now with these women, I was just natural. I didn't put on the man suit or nothing. I was just me, just they knew who I was. I was playful. I was lacking, just crazy, whatever. And then when she wanted me to come out, I saw this guy who had come into the office, and he was kind of towering over one of the ladies, talking with a loud voice. And I knew right away she wants me to put on my man suit. Mm-hmm. So I walked out there, and I said, "Can I help you?" And he left. I didn't have to do a thing. I just put on my man suit, and he left. And I know that's not fair to you ladies, but that's what has to happen sometimes.
Yeah, it's true.
And I witnessed it as a kid. I would watch my mother answer the door, and the salesman would be trying to sell her something, and she'd be so nice. And my father could hear it, and he'd go, "Oh, man." Then he'd get up and he'd go to the door. "We don't want any," and close the door.
Well, actually, what you're saying is not differing from what I say. In fact, it's reinforcing it. We have a society. One of the problems with men adopting the attributes of the feminine is that we have been taught from the time we're little that using the feminine is considered to be less than. Little boys are told, "Don't cry like a girl," and that's a way of saying that we're dismissing them.
Right.
And so it's not acceptable for little boys to adopt the attributes of the feminine, and we expect that they are going to be strong and tough and act the way your father did. And little girls are taught from the time they're born to sit quietly and demurely by their mothers. Little boys are encouraged to go off and run and skin their knees in the playground. In fact, little girls, research shows, little girls are told 3 times as much as little boys to be careful on the playground. So it's quite natural they grow up to be more risk averse. And so we have these expectations about the way that men and women are going to act. And that guy in your radio station had an expectation that he could overpower women, that they were less than he was.
Right.
But another man was going to stand up to him.
Right.
And so I would say that guy was a coward. He wanted somebody to bully.
Right.
He thought he could do it with the women in the station. And another guy, and he was a coward in the first place. And the minute another guy shows up, he's gone.
And you do have a list of observations in your book, whether it's observations from boys and girls to observations to men and women.
Absolutely, because, it's so interesting. We use only 10% of our brain consciously, and the rest of 90% of our brain is making decisions all day, every day, and we don't even know that it's happening. And, there's so much research that shows that, for example, the hurricane research. The hurricanes, they did this out of the University of Illinois, and what they found is that hurricanes that have a female name are 3 times more deadly than hurricanes with a male name.
Yeah. Not this season, though. Michael was horrendous.
But the reason why is because people have a subconscious bias that a female hurricane is going to be weaker than a male hurricane, so they do more preparation for a male hurricane.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they actually evacuate, whereas for a female hurricane, they think, "Oh, I don't think it'll be that bad." I mean, it's crazy.
Well, when Hurricane Larry was forming in the Atlantic, I said, "Come on, be a good one, be a strong one," and it whimpered out. It didn't do anything. I thought, "Oh my gosh, my hurricane is a wimp."
Yeah. You do have observations in there about decisions of the heart and decisions of the head.
Yes, for sure. And, so many of us we think that the only value comes from making decisions of the head, whereas in fact there's so much good research that shows that if we follow our hearts, we can, it needs to be a combination of the two, and we have for too long allowed just the decisions of the head to be considered important. I think I gave the example in the book of the general in the control room map. And he stands and he's got this map and he says, tomorrow we're going from A to B to C to D, which is all about the big picture, and it's the analysis. But the person who comes in with the detail of all the fine nuance says, well, we have, and this is the more feminine approach, we have to remember that between A and B there's a forest, between B and C there's a swamp, because it takes both. We need to have the big picture to hang the detail on, but without the detail, the big picture's not of value.
So in the opening, I kind of tried to use the nature versus nurture argument, and I wanted to ask you.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the natural differences between male and female, as opposed to I mean, there's a lot of nurtured ones, but are there any natural differences?
Well, men grow taller than women.
That's a good one.
Men are stronger than women. On average.
I heard you say sweat. Yeah, I was going to agree with the sweat one too. There are some women that grow taller than most men, and there are some women that sweat. So it's there. But what's interesting is, the things, and the women have greater periphery vision, but these things are so minute in the overall scheme. We used to think, well, the big difference between men and women is that their brains are different. And during the 90s, there were all these books written, the female brain, the male brain, and I read them all. Mm-hmm. And now the latest research has totally thrown everything in those books out the window. The University of Tel Aviv brought out a study where they put 1,400 men and women through an MRI and looked at their brains, and they found that the brains of men and the brains of women, the one that we would consider a male brain or a female brain, the one that's very analytical and independent and self-sufficient, fewer than 1%. And what they found is that our brains are made up of a myriad of characteristics, and they're all different regardless if you're a male or a female. And that's basically what I'm saying. We are all a myriad of characteristics, regardless if we're male or female. Yeah. And we just need to be ourselves. I think one of the areas of the nurture part of us that has affected me personally is in the following description. I have never been attracted to sports. I have great interest in music. In fact, I like musicals. Typically, oh my gosh, you like musicals, you must be gay, right? Because I'm a guy and I like musicals. I'm not gay at all, but I just do, and I couldn't care less about sports. And somehow those things, when I was a kid, wasn't exactly the most popular kid because of those things. Now that I'm adult, I don't care anymore. But I just think that part, if we could lift that, for example, a young lady who loves sports shouldn't be treated any differently just because of that. That's part of her nature, I think.
Exactly, and that's what, there was one thing that I could have come out of this book, it would be that we could give up this attachment that because you're male, you're supposed to act a certain way, and because you're female, you're supposed to act a different way. Because we set up ourselves for being somebody that we're not, and I want us all to be who we are. We're all attracted. We always say, oh, I really like that person because they're real, or I don't like that person because they're a phony. Mm-hmm. But we need to be who we are. I really want us all to be able to express who we are and be who we are, and not spend our time being who we're not.
And you are very appreciative in your book. You're never condescending. And for you to be named one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women, you have to have respect for everyone and value everything. You can't be a tyrant.
Well, we need to be balanced. We need to be able to use the characteristics of both the masculine and the feminine in the appropriate times. And I do think that if we're being ourselves, if we're then being more accepting of ourselves, Robin, that makes us more accepting of others. And, one of the benefits, I think, is that if we can get men to adopt and accept and embrace the feminine in themselves, they will have more respect for the feminine in women as well.
But is there a way to identify those things? I mean, wouldn't each individual be different? Is the rest of that sentence or question? And I also think that this is just my opinion. I think that in the confines of a relationship, after men and women get to know each other, I think they do let all that stuff down. I think every woman knows that her husband will cry. I think every man knows that that his wife can beat up the next guy just as much as he can.
Yeah, I'm great.
Right? I think in the confines of the relationship, we really know that about each other. But then we put on these suits for the rest of the world, right?
Exactly. And that's what we need to break down in our businesses, because I do believe that it's hurting our productivity. Because if you're not being who you are, you're not able to then bring forward all your skills and talents and have the greatest performance.
And that's another great thing that you do with your book, is you have all of these observations and the research and everything, but you say it's not 100% across the board. You can't label this, and that's very amazing too. I love that.
Well, it's interesting. The American Psychology Association brought out these new guidelines for the way that therapists are supposed to treat men. I don't know if you read about it, but it caused a huge furor. And they went through and they named all these characteristics that they considered traditional masculinity. And they had anti-femininity, achievement, rejection of weakness, adventure, risk, and violence. And I went down that list and said, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Some of these characteristics are positive. They're a strength. And some of them, they've been used to the extreme and they're a negative. And, achievement is a virtue, and both men and women need to feel the desire to achieve. That's how we make great inventions. So let's not say that's bad.
Yeah.
And, so is adventure. That's a virtue as well. I mean, I love adventure as much as the next person. I always wear crazy glasses, and as soon as I get a new pair of specs, I feel like I'm on a new adventure. And
Robin and I saw a play. We saw a play on Friday. It was a true story. It was a story about a woman who actually lived in the early 1900s. Her name was Henrietta Leavitt. And Henrietta Leavitt worked at an observatory because she was a woman, was not allowed to use the telescopes, but she studied the images that they acquired from the universe, and she's the one who created the equation that enables us to determine how far a star is away. In other words, the whole term light year comes from her. And I thought, wow, how come we never learn this? And I think there's a perfect example of how what you're saying applies. Because if we didn't have the beliefs we have about gender, she would have been able to maybe do even more than she was able to do.
Well, and second to that, Larry, the fact that she's female means that it wasn't celebrated.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
There you go.
So you had to go to a play years later to find out what she did. It's like that movie Hidden Figures, where those women mathematicians helped NASA get ahead of the Soviets in the space race. But it was a hidden story. Nobody ever knew about it. And
in that case, they were also black. So they had a double reason for not letting us know about them. Yeah, we're making progress in the country, I think. And I think
absolutely.
And I think your book points out that very thing, that we're not there yet, but we're getting there, right?
Absolutely. And all I really want from this book is for it to be exactly what's happening right now, is that we have conversations which makes people open to the ideas that maybe they don't have to be a certain way because they are a certain gender.
Well said.
They can really be themselves.
You have so many great reviews on Amazon. I have a copy of the book, Gender Physics. If you would like the copy that was sent to me, call me right now, 622-9622. I'll set it aside. I'll pick somebody at random, and you can have it. The rest of us have to buy it. I found it on Amazon. Do you have a different website you want to direct us to?
BettyAnnHeggie.com. Just my name.
And I said your name wrong in the beginning. Thank you, Betty, for correcting me after we're done with the interview. Betty Ann Heggie, thank you so much for being on the show with us. The book again, Gender Physics. Thank you, Betty Ann.
My pleasure.
All right.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, Larry and Robin.
You're welcome. We'll be right back.